Okay, so tonight, or last night by the time you watch this, um, they did an episode on Bash at the Beach 2000, WCW Bash at the Beach 2000. And I'm going to tell you personally, from experience, I was, and this is the truth, I was about 2 months in to living on my own. Yeah, I had moved into my apartment. I was on I'm assuming it was the second floor or third floor, one of the two. I think it was the second floor. And long story short, long story short, um, I was on Social Security, believe it or not, um, and they they supplied me with enough money to pay my bills and stuff. And one of the things I would treat myself to at the time was, of course, cable. And the cable we had up until about 2000, mid 2002 um, enabled me to order pay-per-views if I wanted to. So I would order, being a wrestling fan, I would order WWF and WCW pay-per-views, and even on occasions ECW. Just to see what was going around. I think I even recorded, what was it, the IGW pay per view that they did, that one from Australia. I even ordered that one. So I was able to watch wrestling, the premium live events as they're now known, um, when I could. And Bash at the Beach 2000 was one of my first ones. It was one of the first ones I had recorded, because the first one I recorded, I think, was It wasn't Judgment Day. It was trying to think. It wasn't Judgment Day. It was something else. Cause I know if I would have had Judgment Day. I know if I would have had Judgment Day. Um, I think it might have been Fully Loaded. I'm not really sure, but that was my first pay per view. This was my second one. Actually, now that I think about it, this was my second one, and I had them all recorded onto one DVD, one VHS. It consisted of Fully Loaded, Bash at the Beach, and I think even some Nitro and Raw shows or something like that. But mainly the pay-per-views were um, were Fully Loaded and Bash at the Beach. That's what they were. That's what they were. And I remember watching Bash at the Beach because, you know, whether you want to admit it or not, they were trying what they could to get your attention at that time with WCW, with the Millionaires Club and the New Blood. And I was watching Nitro when I could, because I go back and forth, Raw, Nitro. And I wanted to watch Raw a lot more because, because before Lawrence, Kansas, I lived in Oskaloosa, Kansas. And even though me and my dad had cable, the one cable channel we did not have was USA Network. And surprise, surprise, not that long after I move out, they decide to give, this being the cable people, the cable company that my dad was getting cable from, they decide to give him and whoever else had that package, USA. So they gave him the USA Network months, about a year or two, maybe a month or year after I left. And little known secret, and I think I've mentioned this before, my dad never had to pay for cable um, for as long as he lived there. That's the truth. He never had to pay for cable. You want to know what happened? Well, I know I'm getting off track here, but what happened is my dad had cable and we were paying it. We had to drive out. I wouldn't say to the middle of nowhere, but to the closest town that had a outlet for the, or not an outlet, but a headquarters, a building for the cable company. because they're the ones that installed the cable for my dad. And long story short, after we did a couple of payments and they even mailed the payments in and all that, um, I would say honestly, not even before I finished my freshman year in high school, that basically my dad ended up getting the cable for free. He did, because I don't remember once, unless he did it when I was in school. I don't remember once there ever being a cable bill coming to us ever again. I don't remember that. I don't remember it coming to us. So we, soon, and after I moved out, he ended up getting cable for free, because basically something happened to where obviously they were still in business or they'd been bought out by a bigger affiliate, but something happened to where he, and I'm sure he's not the only one, but he and possibly some other accounts got lost, and those accounts that got lost in the transaction, the absorption, if you will, of the company into another, um, those people like my dad ended up getting cable for free because their accounts got lost. And as far as I know, they never contacted him after that. Even after he moved out and moved to Topeka, Kansas, they never let him know about it. They never did. And if he wanted to, but he never did, he could have given my grandma cable. He could have done a little hookup from his house over to hers and gave her cable, but he didn't do that. But yeah, he ended up having cable for free for quite some time. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying, I was catching up on Raw a lot more because being in Oskaloosa, Kansas, with that cable affiliate or cable company, they never gave us USA, never did. I think it was part of another package, but my dad didn't want to pay for it, and then all of a sudden, like I said, they just gave it to him for free, and I'm sure others as well. So, anyway, long story short, I'm recording the pay-per-views because I got myself a VCR. This was before DVDs. I got a DVD player, I think, a little afterwards and everything. I know DVDs had been out for at least a couple of years at that time, but they were really blowing up at that time. They were blowing up in the early to mid 2000s, even though they had been around since about, late 97, 98. But anyway, they were really blowing up at that time. And, like I said, basically, I bought myself a VCR and everything, and basically, started to record, like I said, Raws and SmackDowns and even some Nitros and Thunders when I could. And the tape that had the Thunder on it, the infamous May 3rd, 2000 Thunder with the, the New York rules matches and all that, that also had Bash at the Beach on it. And I remember basically, watching the pay-per-view, and like I said, WCW had done what they could to really what was it? Sorry about that. Hold on. Like I said, WCW had done what they could to get you invested with the Millionaires Club and the New Blood angle, a Millionaires Club versus the New Blood storyline. And, like I said, they'd done what they could to, get your attention. Sorry about that, guys. The phone rang. Found out that my older sister's power went out. in Patterson. Apparently, somebody crashed a car into a power pole, or something happened, and it caused a lot of the streets around her area, if not most of Patterson, to shut down, or at least half of Patterson to shut down, or something. I'm not really sure. So I do apologize. And like I said, the phone rang. But anyway, what was I? Oh yeah, like I said, they were building up. Bash, WCW was doing their best to really get your attention. And I will admit, watching the New Blood versus Millionaires Club storyline, it got my attention. I'm sure it got everybody else's attention, especially when you found out who, was, pulling the strings creatively. Because, you didn't know really that it was Russo. I mean, you heard rumblings. And if you had access to the internet at that time, you kind of had an idea of who the powers that be was. And to see that it was Russo, and to know, because here's the thing too, I didn't have access to a computer even after I graduated. So when I went to Independence Inc. when I could, I was able to be on the computer a little bit, learn, to study, little classes there, as well as have some free time. And that's how I kind of found out that Russo was the one behind what was going on in WWF, and now he was over in WCW. So, so it was interesting to find out, that he'd been behind all these infamous moments over on WWF recently, and now he was trying to replicate that in WCW. And whether you like the man or you don't, whether you feel he's a what's the word I'm looking for? Whether you like the guy or you don't, or you feel he's a pathological liar or whatever, could be, and he likes to fabricate history in his favor. You cannot deny that he did what he could to try to get your attention, and he did what he could in WCW. There's no doubt. Was some of his ideas good? No, they were not. And I think he realized basically after he was told by the higher ups, hey, we're going to do it this way. He was basically, he basically realized that he was in a no-win situation. Let's be honest. The guy was in a no-win situation when it came to this. We all know that. He tried to basically implement his vision of Crash TV onto the audience, onto the southern fan base, that was going international, worldwide, of WCW, like he had done with the northern fan base of WWF, that was basically skyrocketing up into another hemisphere, if you will. Getting some Dr. Pepper there. But anyway, long story short, him and Bischoff working together during that time frame, on screen and behind the scenes, it did make for some interesting television, like I mentioned, and basically what happened with Bash at the Beach, like I was saying, I think it was the second pay-per-view I had recorded. I think it was the second or third one, because no, wait a minute, I think I had recorded Great American Bash or something. I think at least they recorded the middle portion of it, I believe. But I do remember recording fully loaded WWF's pay-per-view in Bash at the Beach, and I remember watching it like everybody else and enjoying it. And then we got to the main event, or at least at least we got to the main event of the evening, which was kind of weird. It was in the middle portion of the show, and I think they had something else going on as well, or something. I think the original idea was it was going to be Goldberg and Nash main eventing the show and closing out the show. I think that was the original idea. Until what happened, and they did elaborate on that here in the episode. Basically, what you hadn't heard, you were getting a recap of it, but in more detail with this episode, and everything, and probably getting more detail than you thought you originally thought you would get, when you first heard about what happened behind the scenes. So anyway, anyway, they get to that moment at Bash at the Beach, and I'll be honest with you. I'll be truly honest with you. You know, going back and remembering the build for Jarrett and Hogan from watching what I did on the replays of Nitro and then the Thunders that came on, you know, on Wednesdays and Thursday nights before SmackDown, or at least the Wednesdays before SmackDown, because SmackDown was on Thursdays, I think. You know, at that time, I'll tell you honestly, the build that they had for Jarrett and Hogan, they didn't talk about this in the episode, but to me, something felt, and I don't know if I'm the only one that felt this, but something felt off to me. Like, you know, okay, we're gonna get Hogan and Jarrett, but why am I not excited? Why am I not excited of we're gonna get Jarrett and Hogan at Bash at the Beach? Why do I feel like something is off here? Because there was something off, and you know, obviously we got our answer. You know, we obviously got our answer as to why we felt something was off, because, you know, we ended up getting what we did, you know, as a result. And they did touch upon that. You know, they touched upon the fact that, and I'll give them credit. They ran the gambit a little bit, kind of recapping Russo's run in WWF before coming to WCW and everything. How he, according to Russo, went to Vince and, you know, told him, let me look at that, and basically wanted to look at the script. And he basically, from what Russo said, he looked at that script and he says, you know, Vince, whatever you have planned for that script, throw it out the window, because, you know, just when they, and he's referring to WCW, thinks we're going left, we're going to go right. In other words, Russo was telling McMahon from his own point of view, when he started to take over and help create the Attitude Era, that instead of going in the predictable direction that WCW always felt WWF would go, they're going to go in the opposite and surprise them. And by doing so, created Crash TV, which is, according to Russo, the implementation of short match, you know, backstage segment, vignette, short match, backstage segment, vignette, short match, backstage segment, boom, 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 boom. And that's kind of what created the Crash TV, because you basically had the audience, you know, wanting to switch over to Nitro to see what was going on, but because you were doing all this at a fast breakneck pace, you know, it was hard for them to do that, you know, because they ended up having their eyes glued to the product. And I think, honestly, with Russo explaining that's how things were then, I think that's why sometimes when you look at the product now with WWF, they're still implementing that. They're still going by that same pattern, if you will. You know, not as much, but you could still see the lasting effects with today's product, in my opinion. And I think that's why some people, like a Just Alex or a JD or a Solid Monster, you know, they might find good in a 3-hour Raw. They might find good in a 2-hour SmackDown. But it's that breakneck speed of boom, 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 you know, that Russo basically implemented when he, you know, was running things creatively. You know, it's basically because of that lasting effect that you still feel today, as to why, you know, people are not used to it, you know, are not so used to what they're seeing, or they're trying to become accustomed to it, but not as much, you know, because it's something that, you know, back then, hey, that worked, that was fine, but now it's 2023, it's not going to work. You know, you need to be slower, you need to slow things down, you need to let things build and all that. So, but yeah, he basically talked about that, and then he talked about the fact that, you know, they did touch upon, I should say, that he was getting exhausted and wanted to have kind of a change of pace. He wanted to be with his family more, or at least have his family closer, and all that. or at least have, his family. He basically wanted to move his family to be closer to his wife's family, so that the kids would have somebody to help her, or that so she would have somebody to help take care of the kids. And from what he mentions here in this episode, and he's talked about this before, Vince McMahon, when he mentioned what he wanted to do, did not miss a beat, turned around and said, why don't you hire an effing nanny to take care of them? And when Vince McMahon told him that, to Russo, that was the last straw. He said, all right, if that's how you feel, I'm out of here. Because to him, you do not tell an Italian American, find an effing nanny to take care of the kids. Family means a lot to the Italians and Mexicans. And any authentic, race, blacks, Mexicans, Latinos, Italians, you name it. Family means a lot. So for someone like Russo, whether you believe this or not, that was the last straw for him. And then before he knows it, that following weekend or the next weekend, he was with WCW, working with them behind the scenes and on camera, or behind the camera, at least faceless, as the powers that be, until spring of that year. They did have Bischoff on here. The talking heads they had on here were Bischoff, Russo, Lance Storm, and Jeff Jarrett and Dave Meltzer. That's who they had. So, anyway, basically, they touch upon, like I said, Bischoff being let go because, they just felt like I guess the higher ups at WCW at Time Warner just felt like he wasn't having it anymore and all that. And then that's why Russo got brought in. And then, of course, they did focus on Russo and Bischoff being brought together. And Russo basically said, I think it was Russo that said this, he got a call from Brad Siegel. I think it was Brad Siegel he talked about. And he said, Brad wants him to meet with somebody. And Russo didn't even have to ask who it was. He instantly had a feeling. He instantly knew and had a feeling that the person Siegel wanted him to meet with was Bischoff. And the idea was to have them both work creatively behind the scenes, if not on camera. And that's how we got the New Blood, on camera as it was, with them leading. Now, Bischoff basically says, that he was all for it. And that Russo basically does it creatively. Basically, in Bischoff's mind, Russo was, and probably still is in his mind, his point of view, creatively bankrupt. Like he doesn't know what he's talking about. Because they do touch upon, Bischoff wanting to be more real, more reality based. And, it starts with Hogan. And of course, we know that they had to cater to Hogan, wanted to keep things a little more cartoony, as like they used to with Dungeon of Doom and all that. With a dose of reality thrown in there, or realism thrown in there. But then what happened is he says he gets a phone call from Dallas Page saying Scott Hall is leaving WWF and wants to come and negotiate with WCW. And then that's when Bischoff realized, I got my storyline right there. My storyline for the summer, if not the storyline that's going to elevate us to that next level. And then he said almost immediately got a call from Nash, and the rest is history. And the NWO was born, out of that, especially with Hogan doing what he did at Bash at the Beach 96. After that, they do talk about how the company was doing well for a while, and then all of a sudden, Vince Russo, on the other side, when he was still with the company, I mentioned earlier, took over and did what he did with the Crash TV, the Boom Boom Boom, and then they get to they get to the time, like I said, of New Blood and everything, New Blood, Millionaires Club, and WCW. Now, they did talk to Lance Storm in this, and Lance mentioned that he had negotiated his contract with both Bischoff and Russo, and that Russo looked at him and came up with, and decided that one of the ideas he wanted to come up with, just by looking at Lance, was, what if we make you Eric Bischoff's illegitimate son? And Lance Storm looked at this basically, what is Russo? He didn't say this in the episode, but just his expression and the way he explained it in the episode was basically like, what is Russo smoking, right? Because Lance Storm basically, said it in this episode. How would that even work? Bischoff is 10 years older than me. How would that even work? And everything. So obviously they went with the idea that he was going to lead his own faction, Team Canada, and he was going to rename all the championships, that he would win. He would rename them with Canadian names. But yeah, they did, like I said, they did talk about the whole New Blood Millionaires Club stuff and how it blur reality and everything. They talked to Jeff and everything. And, Jeff, I have, despite how you might feel about Jeff, whether you want to assume a Jeff Jarrett position, because you believe he didn't, draw a single dime. He didn't draw a single dime despite bashing so many freaking guitars and all that, or breaking a lot of guitars. Jeff Jarrett, he grew up in this business. We know that, and he was raised basically to acknowledge the fact that the real boss is the fans. That you give the fans, what they want. You give them what they want. Whether you think it's right or you don't, you give them what they want. You don't lose. You basically do not lose the trust of the fans. You don't do that, because if you lose their trust, you lose them. Pretty much. Or if you confuse them, you lose them. And the whole thing at Bash at the Beach was pretty much what Jeff Jarrett felt it was going to be. It left them confused, and it caused WCW to lose them. That's what happened, because apparently they were discussing the ideas and all that, as to what was going to happen, right? What was going to happen, and Russo brings up the several scenarios that he came up with. The ones, because basically Russo was very adamant that he did not want Hogan walking out with the title. He didn't, and he mentioned basically that there was one scenario he came up with where Hogan would beat Jarrett, but he would not win the title. There was another Hogan didn't like that. So there was another scenario where he went to Hulk and he said, well, what if I make you look even more invincible? You take down Jarrett, you take down Scott Steiner and any other New Blood member, but you don't walk out with the title. And he said Hogan was cool with that. And he felt like, hey, we're good to go. We're good to go. Of course, Bischoff has another view of things and how things went, because basically Bischoff essentially said, and this was the main thing about this episode, Hogan had creative control in his contract. And there was a lot of things that was revealed, some things revealed in this episode, that pretty much clarified that Hogan could pretty much nix any outcome, of a match that he was involved in. If he didn't want to go over one way, he was going to nix it. If he didn't want to put over a certain person, one way, he was going to nix it. Stuff like that. So, he had that creative control clause in his contract. And I think it was Meltzer or Jarrett, one of them, that said, that doesn't work. That's a conflict of interest. If you are not the owner of the company, then you should not have creative control of anything. But Hulk did. He had that in his contract, pretty much since day one. Since the first day he walked into WCW. He had it in his contract. Anyway, they mentioned that, Russo, came with Hulk with the second scenario, and he felt like, okay, we got something going here. But then here's what's interesting. Russo then says he had a meeting that week with people at WCW, and he asked unanimously across the board, who should we put the belt on? Who should we put the belt on? And they all said Booker T. So the plan was Hulk was not going to walk out the champion, and Russo mentioned this later on. The whole plan was he was not going to walk out the champion, and that basically Booker T was going to be the one winning the belt. That's what was going to happen. Now, the other story going around is that, the idea originally, and this has been talked about a lot, that, they were going to do the scenario to where Hulk, would put his foot on Jarrett, just as we all saw at Bash at the Beach. And basically, the scenario would be the idea, and this is what Russo mentioned in there, Hulk would leave WCW with the belt and make it look like, if not make it very clear in a very real scenario, he was not coming back. So with that idea, you had, I think it was Russo or Bischoff. I think it was Bischoff. Yeah, it was Bischoff, I think. That, it made it seem so real. It made it seem very real that they would have to, in a believable way, do a tournament to crown a new champion. But the idea would be that once they get to the finals at Halloween Havoc, just before the match between the two finalists happens, Hulk walks out and says, can't do this because I'm the real champ, I've got the belt. And I'll admit, as strange as a outcome as that would have been, I think that would have worked. I really do. I think that would have worked tremendously, because because I think they've mentioned this, not in this episode, but they've mentioned this on numerous occasions. You would have turned that tournament final into a triple threat. And Hulk doesn't do, as far as I know, has not done that many multi-man matches. So him doing a triple threat or three-way dance against whoever the two finalists were, I think would have been tremendous. I think it would have been tremendous. I mean, true, he may have not gone over, which probably was part of the agreement. We'll never know. But still, I think it would have been a good idea. But they didn't do that. They did not do that, because what happened was, basically, and this is where things get confusing, because it's like Jericho, who's narrated the series so far, said, things got murky, because, going back to what I talked about with Russo, coming up with that second scenario for Hogan was all for it until the day of Bash at the Beach, when Bischoff basically tells him, you need to go talk to Hulk in his trailer. And Vince said he went in there and it was basically 2 against 1. And that Hulk and Bischoff had decided Hulk wanted to walk out with the title. And Bischoff on here basically said, Russo never had a vote. It was my decision. I'm the one calling the shots, along with Hulk. Vince thinks he has the vote, but he doesn't. And what's confusing about this is later on, Russo mentions that, the idea he came up with and that we saw unfold at Bash at the Beach, that night, was Hogan would do the 1 foot over Jarrett like they had agreed upon, but then Russo said part of that he added on to really make it feel real is he would go off and he would come back out, and shoot on Hogan about what happened, book the Booker T Jeff Jarrett match, crown Booker T champion as unanimously voted on by people at WCW and Turner, do that if you will, and then go from there to where I think the idea would have been now Hogan, Jarrett, and Booker T at Halloween Havoc instead of a tournament final, where Hogan would insert himself in later or just before the match started. Now, according to Bischoff, Russo never came up with that idea. He is lying. He never came up with that idea. And that basically the idea they went with was the one we saw. It's just that Russo decided to go behind their back and do what he did, which of course infuriated Hulk to where Hulk filed a defamation lawsuit against them. But what was interesting about this is Russo basically says, is when they presented this to the judge was even complex about this. Like, so this is a wrestling show, and yet you, Mr. Hogan, are filing a defamation lawsuit, against the Hulk Hogan character, not the Terry Bollea person, but not the Terry Bollea person behind the Hogan character. That's what it got confused, and apparently it got tossed out in numerous courts. Or basically, it went from one court to another, and Russo ended up winning this because how do you defamate, a character, an on-screen character degrading another on-screen character, and all that? It did not make sense. But what was interesting is, according to Russo, there was a fax, and Bischoff denied this. There was a fax that came in, and Russo didn't know about this till obviously the company closed. That it was a fax that came in basically the weekend of Bash at the Beach from Hulk's lawyer, stating that he has the right to nullify any outcome. Basically saying he's not going to go through with the decided outcome and he wants to do something different. And that was it. Now, they did have voice recordings of Hulk on the Tampa radio show the day after Bash at the Beach, talking about what happened and everything. So they went on that. They went and did that. And Bischoff said Hogan did win something. He did win a case to where basically he was rewarded he can't say the number. He wasn't told the number, but it was something in the seven figures. But yeah, even Jarrett here's the thing. Jeff Jarrett in this, he said, because if you watch the event live like I did, and you watch it on a replay in Peacock, basically Jeff does not come out for at least a few moments. He doesn't. It's like almost 5 minutes before he comes out. His music plays, he doesn't come out. Doesn't come out. And Jeff says he's in the back pacing and thinking, well, okay, what do I do? He's conflicted. So he basically decides, screw it. Let's just get this over with, done with. Let's just get it over with and done with and go from there. And, that's when he walked out. That's when he walked out to the ring and, of course, lied down for Hogan. Now, Russo did say, and Jarrett even talked about this, Russo met with Jarrett after meeting with Hogan and explaining what was going on. And Jeff was adamant, like, this is not going to work. We're going to lose the fans. We're going to confuse the fans. We're going to lose the fans. And in a way, he was right. As I mentioned earlier, he was right. Because now all of a sudden it's like, okay, this is something we did not expect to happen. It's like, they figured everything was good. Everything was cool. But now all of a sudden this comes out of nowhere. So, yeah, outside of that, the episode just touched upon things we already knew, already heard about, some things we didn't know, and stuff. And yeah, it is definitely, even though it didn't kill WCW outright at that moment, it definitely left a black eye on WCW, period. And Jarrett said it was probably one of the worst things in his career to do, because he was always taught to do the right thing in the business, give the fans what they want. Don't do something that's going to make you lose their trust and all that, which, pretty much we saw occur at Bash at the Beach. So yeah, overall, besides that, this was an interesting episode. Again, just going over some things we already knew, some things we didn't know, and stuff. And, Bischoff, he did take a shot at Meltzer, because even Meltzer, him being on here, he did kind of drum up a little interest at times, but it was like, basically to Meltzer, it was like, this was just a desperation ploy by Vince Russo and Bischoff and all them to try to get attention on the product, on the WCW product. That's basically how it came off in this. Like, this thing was just a desperation ploy. He did admit that he liked the change of pace with Booker T being champion. He did acknowledge Russo did more harm to the business than good. Bischoff took a crack at Meltzer, called him a scumbag, and all that. So yeah, it's So yeah, outside of that though, this was like I said, this was a very, very interesting episode. Again, just covering stuff we pretty much already knew, some things we didn't know, and all that. Um, but yeah, it was interesting. I mean, one thing that I did learn here, and I kind of had an idea about this, is when Hulk gets mad, he gets silent mad. Like when he gets really pissed off, he gets silent pissed off. And you just better. And Bischoff better says you better be that when you see him like that, you better watch out for your own safety. And he was pissed. He was pissed off. You know, and so yeah, outside of that, just one of those episodes to where, you know, pretty much covered what you knew, what you didn't know, some things that is, and yeah, it still makes you wonder exactly, but it still makes you question who is telling the truth, who is more believable. Is it Bischoff and Hogan, or is it Vince Russo? Who's the one legitimately telling the truth? Where, because there's an old saying that, in between two truths is the whole truth. Like in the middle, there's the actual truth. Like basically about what really happened. In the middle is the actual truth about what happened. So yeah, can't. So yeah, it still makes you want to kind of question exactly who's telling the truth. But I think right in the middle, you're going to get the truth. You just gotta take basically the pieces that are more truthful and believable from both sides, piece them together, and then you get your actual truth, in my opinion. But yeah, overall, good episode and everything. And, basically, like I said, overall good episode. And, all I can say is if you don't know much about Bash at the Beach, or if you do and you want to learn a little bit more, check this episode out. I think you might find it intriguing, interesting. Lance Storm, he was basically like in this episode, like, because he was on the roster at the time. He was basically like, what is going on? It's like, because he, according to him, himself and the others in the locker room, didn't know whether or not what they were seeing was real or was it a work shoot? Like, was it an actual shoot or was it a work shoot? They weren't sure. They were kind of confused themselves. And I think this is right after they saw, along with the rest of us, what happened in the ring at Bash at the Beach. So they didn't know what was going on, whether it was real or not. So even they were in the dark. So anyway, though, outside of that, like I said, this was a decent episode. And, as I mentioned, they covered pretty much everything we've heard and covered some things we didn't know about. And again, I'd say check this out. I'd say check it out if you want pretty much a more detailed, more insiderish, story on what happened, along with, stuff you probably already know. Next week, next week is the season finale, which tells me they got a 5th season in the works, hopefully. And this one is going to be on Marty Jannetty. And this is going to be fun. So, anyway, though, guys, that's all I'm going to say on my review of Dark Side of the Ring on Bash at the Beach 2000. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Live chat, chat in the live chat if you want to. Be greatly appreciated. Also, follow me at BW Roses Discussions on Spotify, which is my podcast, where you'll get an audio version of this as well. Not just a audio video, which you're watching here on YouTube, but an actual audio to listen, when you're out and about, out on Spotify. Follow me there on Spotify at BW Roses Discussions, as well as all your other favorite outlets for podcasts, except for Pandora. But more specifically, Spotify is the place to check me out. It helps me out with the ambassador ads, financially. Also, check out the Teespring store for merchandise you can't get anywhere else. Also, check out my Patreon. Also, check me out at Teespring, guys. We'd really appreciate if you could, look into the merchandise there. Probably buy yourself a glass or something like that. Be really very much appreciated. But anyway, though, that's all I'm going to say, guys. And until next time, I will talk to you all later. You all have a good day. Good night.